Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another video where today we are going to rank all of the Warhammer factions, and that includes, of course, Warhammer 40k, but also this tier list includes the Sigmar factions, and I am increasingly enjoying Sigmar more and more, so I will include them here as well, but we are going to mainly focus on the 40k factions as I simply know them better. So first up we have the Custodes. Now Custodes, in my opinion, are pretty cool. They're gold space marines that are a little bigger, a little beefier, very elite. You know, they're the Emperor's honor guard. They were honor bound to Terra until Guilliman showed up. But overall, I think they sort of end up probably on the upper end of B tier, right? Like, they're not a bad faction. They're not ugly. Their models are pretty solid. But I don't know. They're good. They're just nothing. Like, they're not quintessential 40k. They're not super iconic to the setting. Maybe more so recently, but when I think of 40k, I tend to think more of the Space Marines, the Imperial Guard, the Eldar, the Tyranids, the Orcs. Though I do like the Custodes. In fact, I own some. But still, I think they're sort of a B-tier faction. Now, AdMech. AdMech are a faction that, me personally, I'm not terribly interested in collecting, but I do respect them, and I think they look pretty cool. I think, though, they do sort of grasp what I associate with 40k iconography very much so, because when I was young, right, I grew up on a lot of that 90s and early 2000s 40k art, and the AdMech are like an embodiment of that, right? All the tentacles, all the tendrils, and mechanical bits, and the robotic eyes and everything. So I think that does earn them a spot in A tier in the overall sort of faction ranking, if you will. So next up we have the Eldar. Eldar are, again, they're one of the most iconic factions in 40k. They've been here since forever. They're a very cool faction. I like their aesthetics. I like their units a lot. For a sort of fragile army, they are an army I actually really enjoy. And I do think that sort of earns them A tier alongside the AdMech. To me, they filled a very similar niche in my learning of 40k. Because I didn't collect Eldar, I didn't collect, well, AdMech didn't exist as an army. But I knew of them, and I remember seeing them in artwork a lot, in the books that I owned. I saw Tech Priests, and of course all the Aspect Warriors and everything. So I think that does earn them a spot in A tier. Like, they are definitely fundamental to 40k, but in my personal opinion, I wouldn't put them all the way in S tier. Now, a faction I would is the Imperial Guard. Now, the Imperial Guard, not only were they my older brother's army, one of my older brother's armies, I should say, but they're cool, right? The Imperial Guard, they're just these normal guys. They've got cool armor. They've got laser guns. There's lots of them. They got big tanks. Their aesthetic is so unique, blending sort of, late 19th, early 20th century warfare with this high-tech stuff. It's just a really cool aesthetic that I really enjoy. And then you have things like Sentinels. And Sentinels, to a kid that grew up on Star Wars, were the coolest thing. Like, Sentinels, they're ATSTs, but they've got bigger guns. Imperial Guard are also, like, they are one of the most quintessential factions in all of 40k. They are just, they are the visual of it, right? The meat grinder. Billions of people charging into battle. They capture the scale of 40k, I'd say better than anyone else. Now, Chaos Demons, in my opinion, fall into a similar tier to the Custodes, like, probably a little above the Custodes, though, in my opinion. I know that Custodes are a very well-liked faction, and they're very cool, and they're very important in the lore, but I'm talking, like, in my opinion, what I think of when I think of 40k, I definitely think of the Demons before I think of Custodes. And the Demons are really cool. I mean, that's kind of the long and the short of it. Sci-fi fantasy has existed before this, but you don't really see demons in space that often, right? Usually it's aliens or interdimensional beings, which I guess demons technically are, but these are very archetypal demons. Like, they prey on humans' emotions. They feed on it. But the thing is, when I think of Chaos, I tend to think of the Chaos Marines before I think of demons, honestly. Now, Chaos Knights. Knights are a faction that, similar to the Custodes, they're younger, they're newer on the block. Well, they've been in the background. They only really became popular when they got their models back in 2014, or when it was back in the early 2010s. And I like the Knights. They're cool, they're imposing, right? They're big, stompy war machines, and the Chaos Knights are the evil version, right? They're spiky, and they've got horns and everything, and they're possessed by demons, and they flens skin and arrayed all over. It's very 40k, very cool. But I do still sort of put them in B tier. Like, they're a core faction in a sense, but to me they aren't the faces of 40k, which is what I'm sort of going off of. What do I think of first when I think of 40k, right? Do I think of Knights first, or do I think of the Imperial Guard? I think of the Imperial Guard. I think of the billions of troopers charging into battle with thousands of tanks following them up. Now, Chaos Space Marines, and Dark Angels by extension, were the first ever armies I saw, so there is going to be bias here. But Chaos Space Marines are just so sick. Now, super soldiers in space have been around since, ever since sci-fi has been a thing, right? Back in Dune, you have the Sardaukar, right? The Starship Troopers, which aren't necessarily super troopers, but then you also have the Spartans in Halo. Like, this is such an archetypal thing, but to see them be evil, be possessed by magic, is just really cool. And also, it has some of my favorite models. That's another thing I'm taking into account here, is their model range. Or do the models look good? Are they faithful to what they came from? And the Chaos Space Marines are probably some of the best in all of 40k and Warhammer as a whole. Their trim looks fantastic. Their armor's all very unique. All ranked up, they make this beautifully varied army. And they certainly have obviously been around forever. And just given their importance to me, the first thing I ever saw was Azrael and a Demon Prince back in 2005. So it's hard for me to not just do this off instinct. And much of what I said to the Chaos Marines applies to the Dark Angels. You take that super soldier trope, like these big, heavy armored units, and you make them into monastic knights. Like, that's sick. They all wear robes, they've got swords, they're very shadowy, and they use Terminators, which, if you're unaware, I'm a huge Terminator fan. So these guys go to S tier. They're my favorite of the sort of generic Space Marine, the Space Marines, if you will, really. They're up there with the Blood Angels, at least. Now we have Death Company. So now we're getting into sort of the factions that have been there, but... did I call them Death Company? Death Guard. But I'm not necessarily as ingrained in my head with them as I am other factions. And Death Guard, I don't really like their model range. Not that they're bad models, I just don't like the aesthetic, which I think gives them our first C tier, right? They're passing, but I'm gonna put them in D tier. I'm sorry, D for Death, right? I'm already not the biggest Nurgle fan. There's ways Nurgle can look very cool. I think the Maggotkin of Nurgle come to mind from Sigmar. But I'm just not a big fan of the aesthetics of the Death Guard. It's when it comes to the god-specific legions, they're not quite as integral to the setting, in my opinion, as the normal Chaos Space Marines, right? And out of the god-specific legions, while the Emperor's Children haven't gotten their refresh yet, these guys are still going to be in 4th place, even when they do. And that's sort of my thing with it. I know the Death Guard are a faction that is rightfully near to a lot of people's hearts, right? They got their refresh in 8th edition, which brought so many players back to the game. And a lot of new players started with Death Guard. So I understand that this might not be the most popular opinion, but I've played against Death Guard. I don't really enjoy fighting them. I don't really enjoy their models. And overall, I just don't really find Death Guard that intriguing. Next up, we have the Drukhari. And the Drukhari, which you will notice, I'm going to make a quick tangent about this. When the whole, there was the issues of Eldar technically being copyrighted, so they stopped using that, or it could be, so they went to Eldari, which could be copyrighted. I still call them Eldar, but Dark Eldar, I call them Drukhari, and let me tell you why. Because Drukhari is a fun word to say. Eldari, if you will, isn't. Drukhari is fun. Anyways, Drukhari are not a faction I have that strong of a connection to. Their models are okay. They're from the Middle Ages of 40k for the most part. And they do have one of my least favorite models in Lilith Hesperax. I hate that model. It's a big alien head. But I think that puts them sort of in the C tier, right? Because once you get past like S and A, those are the iconic factions. What I think of when I think of 40k. B, we're getting into factions that I like, that are also pretty important to the setting. And then C, or like B, things that are very 40k. C, we're getting into things that are like, okay, this is a 40k thing that's been there forever, but it's just not for me. And then D is factions I'm not that big of a fan of. And then F will be for factions that I hate, which I can't really think of many, if there are any, really, that I should just like vehemently dislike. So next up we have the Grey Knights. Now, Grey Knights almost have the same appeal to me as Dark Angels and Chaos Space Marines, and that's because my eldest brother owned a Grey Knight Terminator, right? And he never fully painted it, and it just kind of sat on his desk in metal. But that was a very cool thing to me, right? It's a Terminator, like those Chaos guys with the tusks, but he's got like a knight helmet and a big sword. He's cool. So I think I'm going to put these guys probably in sort of like the middle of B tier. In my opinion, they're similar to the Custodes. Obviously, the Custodes models are a lot more modern. But the Grey Knights, I think if the Grey Knights got their update, they would be cooler than Custodes, model-wise, if you want to go on lore, whatever. Grey Knights are really cool. I really like Grey Knights. I'm going to put them above Demons, and I think I'm going to put Demons at the bottom of B tier. They're in a similar sort of thing, though. B tier, it's very influenced by my personal opinion. This whole thing is obviously the tier list. Regular Knights, I'm just going to put with Chaos Knights, because to me these things are the same. One just has a little more spikes. Tomato, tomato. Next up we have the Leagues. Now the Leagues of Votann are the youngest faction in 40k at the moment. And I like the Leagues of Votann. I think they're sort of spacesuit, almost like space age aesthetic. I think is very cool. The bulbous design of their vehicles I really quite like, and I like their infantry. I'm looking at a squad of them right now. They take paint really well. Their weapons are really cool. They've got revolvers, which is a way to my heart. If something has a revolver, I like it. But I can't put them in the tiers of things that are really iconic because the Leagues aren't. They aren't old enough yet. Maybe in 15 years when the Leagues have 40 model kits and are a staple of 40k, I will. But for now, I'm going to put them behind the Custodes. I love the Leagues of Votann, but they're the new kid on the block. They still need to prove themselves. They need just that little bit more. They need a cool space mech, and then you'll have me sold. Necrons. Now, Necrons are a faction that I own quite a bit of because I got Indomitus, but interestingly, when I got back into 40k around 2013, 2014 for the second time, before my next Dark Age, Necrons were actually the faction I was going to start. And here's a funny story about this. I was talking to my older brother, who was obviously the one buying our 40k kits, and I'm like, I really want to play at Necrons. They look so cool. And then he somehow convinced me that Orcs would be a cheaper army to collect, which, especially at that point, I don't know what he was on. That is not true in the slightest, but we'll get to that when we get to that. That's just a funny story. But Necrons, I think, do earn their place. They're probably going to end up near the bottom of A tier. Necrons were in Dawn of War, which I watched my brother play a lot, and I've played a lot myself, even though I've gotten kind of tired of it, because I've been, I want a new Dawn of War. That isn't awful. But Necrons they're solid. They were in artwork. They were very cool. They were still pretty new when I was a wee lad getting into 40k. But still, I really like the Necrons. I think they look cool. Their model range is very sick. They're very, like, when I think of the big 40k Xenos factions, and all the factions as a whole, Necrons are pretty high up there. They're just really sick. Now, we're getting on to my personal favorite faction, which may surprise you since I mainly do Space Marine content, but that's because it seems to be what you guys enjoy watching. Orcs are my favorite faction. I love the idea of these space barbarians. Isn't necessarily like the most unique thing, if you will, but space barbarians that are also orcs that use this power of belief to make things happen in real space, and they are just this monstrous thing of running enemies over with this huge tide of muscle. And at range, they have these really cool-looking guns with these big heat shields, which really appeal to me, and how they're described in the lore as these loud, sort of mid-fire rate weapons that just go like boom, 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 boom. That's like my favorite thing, right? And, I mean, you got big claws, you've got giant walkers with 4 arms, General Grievous Walker, like, yo, they're cooking. Orcs are the best faction in 40k, bar none. I'm putting them at the top of S tier, and they are not moving from that spot because Orcs are the coolest faction, and I rest my case. Also, their models age better than any other faction. That's why we have a model from 1998 that still looks good today. That's a middle finger to the warp spiders, by the way. So here we have normal Space Marines, and I'm not moving the Orcs, but I must concede, when people think of Warhammer that only really kind of know the surface level, what do they think of? Blue Space Marines. And for that, and how cool Space Marines are as a concept, and they always will be, I am going to put them in S tier just behind the Orcs. Just because Orcs are my personal favorite, but I know that it's no surprise, it's no secret. Space Marines are the most popular faction. They just got Space Marine 2. What did that game have? 2 million players on its first weekend? That's huge. I can't deny it, but Orcs are cooler, and I stay by that. Next up, we have the Tau. So the Tau were also sort of the new kids on the block when I got into 40k as a kid, and the Tau, in my mind, occupy a similar space to the Necrons. Not only were they also in Dawn of War Dark Crusade, but they were cool. Like, they were these things that, because when I was a kid, I didn't really know what anime was, so these really cool, sleek mechs with these big blocky armor and big blaster guns just look cool. And I think this is an experience I'm sure many of you have had. If you've ever played with a Tau player, they'll always say, let me set up the terrain, at least the first time you play them. And my brother did that to me, because he owned, I think, 20 Fire Warriors and a Devilfish. And so what did he do? He rolled out our green grass mat from the hobby store, set up like 3 trees, and then was like, all right, we're ready. Turn 2, my entire Space Marine army was dead. Anyways, the Tau, very cool faction. I think that some of the hate they get is sort of because of their playstyle, but also unjust, just because it's the meme, right? But I know Tau. Tau are a well-loved faction, even though people make fun of them all the time. Next up, we have the Thousand Sons. Now, the Thousand Sons, to me, out of the Cult Marines, are my favorite, so far. The Noise Marines might displace that, but I highly doubt it. Rubric Marines specifically, and Scarab Occults just look so cool. Like, so cool. And for that, I am going to put them in a similar tier to sort of the rest of these factions. Because when I was a kid, I didn't know what a Rubric Marine was. I didn't see a Rubric Marine until I was like 15. Probably a little younger than that. I think I was 13 when I first saw the old resin Rubric Marines. Or metal as well, depending on how far back you go. And I am going to put them above Knights, just because their models, in my opinion, I like more than Knights. Next up, we are going to cover... Who is it? Tyranids, that's right. Tyranids are another faction that I saw very young in my 40k career, and they're cool. They are sick. I cannot deny that. I cannot tell a lie. Tyranids are so cool. Big horde of bugs. They've got all these big monsters. But, even though my eldest brother had a couple squads of Hormagaunts, I'm going to put them in this tier. This tier deviates at the Necron and Admech line to things that I was super familiar with as a kid, to things that all of these I was familiar. Actually, Admech, you're too high up. Yeah, I like this more. I'm going to put Tau above Necrons because I was, to be honest, just more familiar with Tau than I was with Necrons for most of my time in 40k. So next up, we have the World Eaters. Now, the World Eaters are great, right? They're more Space Marines. I like Space Marines. They're huge. They've got giant chain axes, and they run at their enemies, and they scream a lot. They're basically Space Marine Orcs, but somehow less intelligent than Orcs. I guess having nails in your brain will do that to you. So, I love World Eaters. They're a great faction. However, I'm going to put them sort of in this mix, where they're below these guys. Because I remember seeing World Eaters, even though I've never owned any, in terms of overall, like, they're sick, right? They're a specialist marine, given their whole army. Sisters of Battle. Now, this is one I haven't shared on this channel before, but back in, I want to say, 2009, I had a very brief stint of getting back into 40k after sort of not interacting with it for a couple of years, and that stint included me getting a few squads of metal Sisters of Battle. Now, I have long since lost those models. I was very dumb when I was a kid, and I threw away a lot of Warhammer models, and I still kick myself over that so much. Regardless, I don't think these sisters went with that. Sorry, that was quite a tongue twister. And I don't even know where they went, and I haven't seen them since I was just a wee kid. And to be honest, sisters, despite the fact that I've owned them, I'm going to put them below a lot of factions that I've never owned. Even though they are pretty iconic to the setting, I think they're going to end up in this mix of factions that I like, but not necessarily collect or anything like that. They don't appeal to my sensibilities, if you will. They kind of lack something like a Terminator unit, which is generally something I look for in an army, if you couldn't tell. Gene Stealer Cults, great models, very cool aesthetic, cool lore. They kind of occupy the same space in my mind, though, as the Drukhari, but I'm going to put them above Drukhari because I think their models are nicer because they are newer. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our 40k tier list, because for some reason Blood Angels and Space Wolves aren't here. But I'm just going to say S plus Blood Angels, and B... I'm sorry, Space Wolves players, I'm not a big Space Wolves fan. Space Wolves, let me give a quick thoughts. Blood Angels, sick. Devastation of Baal, one of my favorite books. And also, they look cool. I will stand by that. Space Wolves. They are not that interesting to me. I don't think they have too much going on that really interests me, despite the fact that they have their own unique Terminators, which the Blood Angels don't. But that proves I'm not just a guy who really likes Terminators. So, the Space Wolves fill that spot, right? They don't fit, in my mind, they're not on the same level as the rest of the Space Marines. Sorry. So, that covers all the 40k factions. Yeah, I'm not forgetting nobody. No, because the only other thing we're not covering is like Emperor's Children, but they aren't their own faction yet. Now, get a good look at this, because we're going to make it a lot more confusing. Maybe we won't. What we're going to do is end this video here, actually, with one quick addendum from the Age of Sigmar lineup. These guys are S tier. Slaves to Darkness is the best model range that Games Workshop makes. They are so sick. They are Dark Knights, and they are evil, and they are cool. And there are a lot of other really cool factions in Sigmar, but I don't think you guys particularly are super interested in Sigmar. I think it is a game that I want to spread the knowledge of, but this isn't the faction to do that. This isn't the video to do that, rather. Regardless, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.